Is generative AI video a good thing? Or is it not? That's the discussion with today's guest, Avisha Naseva, aka Distilled Science. The context for this conversation happening is that I made a video a couple of weeks ago talking about my concerns with generative AI video and deepfakes. And Mr. Distilled Science over here stitched that, saying actually there were some upsides to the existence of generative AI video, which I hadn't considered. We had a bit of a back and forth over a couple more videos, and then I said, hey, why don't we just hop on a call and hash it out? Which we do. I've watched Avisha's stuff for a while. He's a fountain of knowledge and he combats misinformation, specifically around science, online, which I think is a really important cause. He's a super interesting guy. So this conversation kind of happens in two halves. It's basically a choose your own adventure game. The first half is I interview him just generally about the stuff he makes and his process, and he has some really interesting tidbits of knowledge to share around health and fitness and other stuff. And in the second half, we get into the weeds talking about generative AI video, upsides, downsides, how we think this is going to impact misinformation online and everything else. So if you want the full thing, start from the beginning. But if you want mostly the AI stuff, then you can go to this timestamp, which I will definitely edit in here. And yes, I did break bad between the recording of this interview and the recording of this video intro. But hey, sometimes you just got to let the intrusive thoughts win. Yeah, I mean, we're going to leave that with the introduction. Yeah, I hope you enjoy. The first question I'd like to ask you is, you've recently had a really popular series of videos around tingles and touch, specifically sort of sensation on the scalp. Can you tell me how this relates to oxytocin? Why do some people like being touched this way? And yeah, what were your findings?
Sure. So it's actually funny that I even got into this topic because several months ago, a friend of mine asked if I could give a lecture on the science of human connection. So I spent several weeks researching all the science around human longevity and social connection and how those two interact and what are the biological mechanisms that human connection has with, like, how it overlaps with health. And one interesting study amongst the many, I did like this whole deep dive into oxytocin and all the different things we know about it, all the different ways that it influences both the human psyche and body. And that was just one microcosm of how human connection influences physiology. So I made this one video about this cool study talking about the way that oxytocin influences the perception of touch, which is that when you stroke someone, like when you experience light touch, the sort that would give you chills, it actually works on a different type of nerve fiber on your periphery called CT fibers. And these are ones that are sensitive to very light touch as opposed to firm touch. So the difference between light chills, like between 2 centimeters per second, gentle touch, as opposed to a firm pressure moving back and forth, that's activating CT fibers as opposed to several other different types of nerve fibers. And that particular type of touch both increases oxytocin production, and when oxytocin levels are higher, it is perceived as more pleasurable. So there's this nice little feedback loop. And they did this in a cool study where they used intranasal oxytocin to actually artificially elevate oxytocin levels and have people rate the different pleasure levels that they experienced, as well as put them in an fMRI machine and looked at how different regions in the brain light up. And they found that when oxytocin levels were higher, people experienced a greater degree of pleasure from this type of touch, which I thought was fascinating because it's like this.
That's super cool.
Yeah. It's also, I love finding areas of research that I could sort of apply in some way to my own life to enhance it. So one direct mechanism there is just the way to incorporate this sort of light touch with interactions with a partner are sort of, we all are familiar with the concept of foreplay, but this is a more direct neurological mechanism to use this sort of touch to sort of enhance a romantic context, because oxytocin essentially is how our body interacts with just social bonding in general. And if we can use that to both elevate social bonding and then also to make other forms of touch more pleasurable, including the former touch and massage and sexual activity, then it's just like a cool mechanism. So I made a video about this.
So and win-win. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
It's great. So this is like just one of the very cool little bits out of like 20, 30 others that I spoke about in my lecture and talked about. I was like, I'm going to start with like a fun little video about oxytocin talking about this. And then an interesting thing that I found was that so many people were commenting, but I hate that type of touch. It's painful. It gives me anxiety. It makes me like resist. So that was something that I just sort of heard about in the periphery, but it wasn't a main part of my research. But after getting all these comments, I decided to do a deep dive into what might be going on there. And I found all this interesting literature around the different areas of the brain that could be impacted that might actually reduce the amount of pleasure you get from it, or in some ways make it activate alert systems as opposed to pleasure systems. And this happens at multiple different areas, because in the nervous system, you've got the action at the nerve on your periphery. Then you've got your spinal cord, which is sort of like the sorting hub that receives those signals and sends it up to the brain. And then within the brain, you have different areas that are contextualizing signals as enemy, friend, pleasure, not, and there's all sorts of different things that can go wrong at every different step that interact with different sorts of conditions that might make that type of touch be painful as opposed to pleasurable. Like if you've got a central nervous system disorder like fibromyalgia, chronic pain, then at the spinal cord, those light touches actually can get over amplified, and the signal that reaches the brain is too strong that gets interpreted as pain as opposed to pleasure. Whereas people on like the autism spectrum, or even some people with ADHD, at the level of the brain, sometimes it's like with ADHD, there can be too much neural noise, and these sorts of touches get misinterpreted as just the wrong type of stimuli, or they can sometimes, the threat perception levels within the brain are sort of like cranked up, and it's a lot more likely for any sort of touch to just be deemed as a threat as opposed to pleasurable. And there's like all sorts of interesting like sub areas of research that I didn't even get into with my videos, where it's like after that first initial touch, then the brain starts actually taking into account the context of like, who is this person? What are they touching me? What was I doing? Did they like break me out of something else? And after the first like 30 milliseconds, which is like your spinal cord response, then like half a second later, there's like your initial brain response. And then within the next couple seconds, it's sort of putting it into different categories of threat or friend. And that's sort of, again, in terms of practical applications, it informs the way to potentially approach touch with someone who has one of these conditions, disorders, because you can think about it like, if the issue is mischaracterizing a touch as being a threat, then you need to make sure that they expect it in advance, and that the person it's coming from is a friend or loved one, so that then as soon as they interpret that signal, their brain sort of has like a preconditioned ability to sort it into the right bin to say, this is a friend, and now let's maybe be able to actually enjoy it.
Yeah, this is safe, this is a caress, this isn't an attack, and then, we can lean into that sensation. So, that's fascinating, because I really hate... and when some people love them, massages. And so, in like even sports ones or sort of like light ones, it's always just been something that sort of bothered me. And you're right. There's always a part of my brain which is thinking, unless I really trust that person, which, if you're going for a sports massage, typically you haven't met the person before. I'm just thinking, danger, this person's going to hurt me, even though I've signed up for it. So, that's fascinating. I feel like this... is a microcosm of what I understand it is you do with your content, which is, from what I've read, you have a background in academia, but I've read, you've said something to the effect of you transition from that to scientific content creation because you sort of felt like there was a stack of insights that was sort of buried away in academia, and it was going to be a long time before those insights reached the public. Is that a sort of fair, very high-level summation of sort of what drove you to do this, and what's your story going from studying science directly to doing what you do now?
That's definitely one of the large reasons why I shifted. When I was in grad school, I was studying electrical engineering with a focus on signal processing. So I was spending my time like doing machine learning code. I wrote my master's thesis on a piece of software to like analyze people's faces and detect blemishes and automatically fix them. And it's a totally different side of things. But I was also reading all these research papers on things like advanced probability theory and quantum mechanics, and just really learning to dive into the most esoteric type of research imaginable. Meanwhile, I'd be walking around my lab, and there's like 20 other grad students working on all these different projects. And so many of these projects were fascinating. And in my mind, I kept looking at them and being like, okay, so as soon as you finish your paper, you're going to then turn this into a company and apply it so people can use this to actually help their lives in some way. And they just gave me this weirdly quizzical look, like, I'm going to publish another paper on something else.
Yeah, that's it. I gotta get it 4 out this year minimum, otherwise I lose my...
Exactly, and half of these papers are poorly
written
written anyway, because these people are like nerds who English is their second language, they don't really know how to write, and they publish something cool and it gets completely buried. So that just made me annoyed and made me make the decision to not go for my PhD and instead just go from my master's towards doing things in industry that would actually be taking science and directly apply it. And it was a long time before I really got into the science communication side of things, at least in a more professional context. I always have spent my life trying to explain science to people to various levels of success.
Tell me about it. Tell me about it. Yeah. Whether they ask for it or not.
Exactly.
They get an explanation.
My friends are basically accustomed to the fact that in a random dinner conversation, I am likely to cite one study per 5 minutes.
That's a good reputation to have, like forced education. You're going to get smarter hanging out with me. So, yeah. That's cool. So, because you did some stuff with biotech companies, right? You started some of your own stuff, and now you advise. I mean, it sounds like you do a million things, so I'm trying to imagine your schedule. But was that the in-between grad and content creation?
So, there was a couple different steps. I spent a while doing quality control protocols on MRI machines, where I was both running in-person tests on the machines and then also developing a software package to analyze images coming out of the MRI machines and do some sophisticated analysis to make sure that they're operating properly. And that involved both traveling to different hospitals around the country and just doing a lot of math and programming and analytics. And then while I was doing that, I started working with another friend of mine on a different company, which is we developed a way to refill expired EpiPens. And that was pretty soon after all the massive EpiPen price hikes, where they went from $100 for a pair up to $740 for 2 of them in the span of a couple years. And for absolutely no reason, because they cost a couple dollars to make. But I had a friend.
Is this in the US specifically? Yeah, this is. Yeah,
it's in the US, but the prices also went up worldwide because essentially the rights to the EpiPen were bought out. And the company that bought them, Mylan, decided, you know what, we're going to charge however much we can get away with for any market we're going into.
That's frustrating.
And when it comes to a device that's you need to have it or you die.
No, otherwise, no. It's people,
and
choose between.
They expire every 18 months, which is really around a year after point of purchase. So it's either you buy new ones every year, which insurance coverage is sometimes okay, sometimes not. Lots of times people are buying out of pocket. And if you have really bad allergies, you need to have them at home, at work, in your car, anywhere you might suffer. So people were spending a lot and then just throwing these things out because over 90% expire never having been used. So we developed a way to open them up and swap out the epinephrine and close them back up and give them back.
Fantastic. Amazing.
Unfortunately, selling something like that requires going through the full FDA process and going up against a big pharma company. And it's a very, very weird product to describe to people because it's not a new drug. It's not a medical device. It's essentially a mobile miniaturized manufacturing system for creating a new branded drug out of an old one or combination drug product. And that essentially made it that investors shied away. So we spent many years in the fundraising process, raised some money, but never managed to get enough to actually go through the FDA and get the proper trials required. So it's...
that's heartbreaking.
It's very frustrating. It's still a company that we're still we periodically submit grant applications and have investor talks, but it's been stagnated for years now because we just can't seem to find someone willing to go up against big pharma in that way and just push it
and
through.
That huge regulatory hill, right? Yeah.
The thing is, we have the regulatory pathway laid out. It's actually not that difficult because all we need to do is demonstrate that after our refill, it functions the same as the original EpiPen, which is not hard.
Right.
So it's non-traditional when it comes to VCs who have certain buckets that they invest in. But when it comes to the actual pathway, we have top of the line regulatory consultants who have really laid this out for us in a way that is not going to be that difficult. The FDA process will be simple. It's just, it's $1 million to submit to the FDA, which you can sometimes get waived as a first time company, but conducting the trials to go through and submit the data is a couple $1 million. So.
Oh my God. That's so frustrating because that's such a clear. Look, I don't do angel investing or any investing of any kind really, but it seems to me that's such a clear market. Presumably, it's far cheaper to refill them than buy a new one, so you'd be undercutting competition. That's so frustrating.
Our goal was to just sell these refills for $25 a piece, because
heartbreaking.
Yeah. So getting involved with that whole process, though, essentially launched me into the medical startup space. Anyway, I was going to networking stuff, pitch competitions, all that jazz. And I ended up, one of our early investors was a venture capital firm that runs pitch competitions for startups around the country, especially focused in New York in the health tech space. And I started helping them put on events and then grew close with the founders of it and started doing some work with them, just both with events and helping them vet companies to go and see, is the technology behind this company effective or not? because really my forte is learning things quickly, which involves, take any random new tech, read through their patents, go do a literature review around what it is that they are claiming and how their claims match up to the actual scientific evidence, both of their own and what other people have published, and then try to get a good sense of, is this something that is both feasible technologically and monetarily, economically, all that.
And I suppose having had that experience whereby a large part of why you couldn't get the funds you needed was, it seems like, a communication gap. So if you're on the side of advising the investors directly and something comes across your desk, which perhaps at first glance seems overly complicated, but you can go, no, actually, if you look into the literature, claims are saying it's legit. There's a real case for this. So I suppose you can participate in advocacy of good ideas from that point of view, right?
Honestly, I love looking at new companies. I don't know if I'd be the best investor by myself because I might have a habit of getting a little bit too excited about the technology.
Too excited. Yeah, it's going to work. It's going to work.
This could totally work. Meanwhile, the founder is some nerd who will never be able to actually execute and get this thing profitable. But
what is it? My friend, he works in VC and he says it's the only industry where you assume like a 98% failure rate. So, if you're getting a 3% success rate, you'd be like one of the best investors ever, right? So
exactly.
Oh, man. Okay. So that makes sense then in light of everything else you do. Because I think your early TikTok videos that I saw were around COVID. Because I think you got started around the same time I did, which was around 2021, where there was a lot, talk about misinformation, walking into the misinformation storm. So what was that? Was there sort of like a moment where you thought, right, I'm going to start, making an effort to correct misinformation out there in the COVID-19 situation?
So the way that happened was from the very beginning of 2020 when COVID-19 first came onto the radar. I was curious, so I started reading all the information we had about it, which basically translated to reading the initial government reports, but then reading all the preprints of academic papers that were the initial analyses. And I developed a habit, or I would basically wake up in the morning and look at the preprint servers, read the papers that struck my interest. And as the pandemic started developing, I started realizing more and more that my understanding of what was going on was fundamentally different from all of my friends and family that I'd be talking to and just everything I'd be seeing, because they'd be getting all their information from the news, from Facebook, from random politicians or people with strong opinions. But
Actually, I'll have a YouTube commenter told me that this, which means, I really can't trust the government. Pfizer is an anagram for,
this person is a doctor, therefore they should be able to weigh in on how disease spreads, which is actually more of a epidemiological/physical, actually. Very early on in 2020, I did an analysis of everything we know about droplet spread and how respiratory droplets are produced, what types of compounds can get attached to them, what's the evaporation rate, the spread, what we know from challenge trials from things like the flu with animals and humans, actually, where they'd literally done challenge trials where they give humans the flu and then see how it spreads in different contexts. And we knew at the very beginning of 2020 that this virus would spread via respiratory droplets that could remain airborne for extended periods of time. That did not make its way into the public consciousness until, mid-2021. Everyone was like, 6 feet, 6 feet, stay back, it's my droplets, it's got to wipe Lysol my groceries because it's good contact. Totally different. The overall public perception was completely shifted. And during 2020, I actually ended up working with some of these VC folks. We spun up a new company to try and help technologies that would be effective in the reopening process get to people and companies and government institutions that can make use of them. We did a lot of work in the air purifier space. And as part of that, I was doing I'd spend 3 or 4 hours a day reading through the research on what we know about the current situation, what we know about technologies that could be potentially helpful, airflow, purification, decontamination, all sorts of different stuff. And at a certain point, I was like, okay, maybe I should start actually sharing some of the things that I am reading about and learning with other people, because there's just this large disconnect. Meanwhile, at I guess towards the end of 2020, my girlfriend had she heard about this new app called TikTok, and she's a musician, singer-songwriter, and started both using it and looking into it as a way to sort of spread her own content. And I figured, you know what? I will be a good partner and I will start researching this app and figure out how is it that people succeed or fail on this new platform. So I spent several months lurking. I created a couple like dummy accounts. I analyzed other accounts very carefully, like which accounts grow quickly, which ones grow like slowly and steadily. Is there ones that like start off from the beginning with like high follower counts, or are there ones that start off slow and then there's an inflection point which they go up? What works for different spaces? What video formats work? So I created a couple dummy accounts, created some test videos to see like how it felt to be in front of a camera, what things would work or not. And when I thought I had a good handle on it, I was like, you know what, before I go and present this to her, why don't I try it just for myself, if talking about science stuff with, maybe I'll focus on COVID. So I very carefully planned out and crafted my first video. I posted it and got, I think, 11,000 followers overnight.
Boss, that's really cool. That's really cool.
And then she was angry at me.
Well, you were passing on insights. That's how the experiment worked.
It did work. It did work. The thing that she had been trying at for the last like couple months, and then I suddenly just like leapfrogged.
I mean,
and,
it's science and good timing. Now, ironically, a similar thing happened with my sister and I, where I was playing around. I decided to start making videos because I used to do a lot of improv comedy, and obviously all in-person theater stopped, and I had this half-decent camera. And my sister was joking to me that she was just a lot more hip because she had like 200 followers on TikTok, and that was the latest platform. So I was like, all right, okay, and
go.
My goal was to get past that. So she was not super happy at the time either. So so how many people who talk about the latest research do you think actually read the papers they're referencing?
If I had to ballpark a number, I would say under 5%, but maybe under 1 or 2%, especially given the fact that it depends what you mean by talk about, because a lot of people who you'll be talking with at a dinner table or party, they'll say, oh, I saw this new study that said this. They likely saw some sort of viral Instagram post, which is one of these big images with big bold letters that says, new study finds that middle children are smarter.
Coffee is good for skin or something. Yeah.
And then they'll read the description and it's like, research out of the University of California in 2023 showed this. And then if you actually do the due diligence, you realize that there was no study in 2023 out of the University of California. This is just some GPT 3.5 amalgamation of things that could sound like real research. Or it was actually a blog article that cited another blog article that cited a news article that cited a press release that talked about a paper that mentioned something related to the topic of their claim, and it has been broken telephone so many times that there is actually nothing to do with it.
Yeah. It's I think I saw once Hank Green try to like find a video, find the reference of where a number had come from in terms of like a widely shared report. And the number had come from a study which wasn't even about the number that had been quoted. It was something to do with something totally different. And they had just taken this reference from a part of a chart. And just the amount of labor it took to get to that of where has this idea even come from was absurd.
And meanwhile, like, if I look at an Instagram post like that, it could take me a couple days to track down, okay, where did this claim come from? What was the chain? How do I then do a full, like, literature review to figure out, is what they're saying, does it actually have any substantiation in research, regardless of what they cited? And then make a video about it. And then the first video got 20 million views because it's sensational. And my video can get, like, 50,000 views because it's detailed and talks about science and is not actually saying something that is amazingly surprising. So the ratio of people who know the real science versus the sensationalized bit, it's like an endless deluge in one direction and like tiny little rocks in the stream from the other side.
Does that demoralize you? Because sometimes it demoralizes me. Like, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, it definitely does. Like there are some times when I'll make a debunking video that actually gets reasonable traction. I'm like,
it's working. We're winning the war. Yeah.
Unfortunately, the vast majority of the debunking content that I make doesn't actually, it's not my most successful style because people prefer to be told what to do than what not to do. People prefer to be the ones sharing the new and exciting and over sensationalized rather than the careful and methodical. And it's such like a fine needle to thread to make it both entertaining enough and applicable enough for people to care enough to watch, view, share, all of that.
Nuance is rarely sexy. I think that the person who I've seen do it quite effectively recently is Dr. Blitz. I met him once when he was in London. He's you probably know him. He stitches all the videos with, "This will not go well." That's his whole thing. And it's sort of become his brand of correcting physics misinformation. But still, you can just see it's an uphill battle with everything he does. And obviously the irony is that there's an endless amount of stuff for him to correct because there's so much.
Yeah. Actually, some of my most successful debunking type of videos are in the physics space, especially when talking about pop culture. Like I did a couple videos on Oppenheimer that did very well. I did a video on actually the Buzz Lightyear movie that really.
Oh, really? I never saw that. What annoyed you about the Buzz Lightyear movie was?
The entire premise of the Buzz Lightyear movie was Buzz gets stranded on this planet and his hyperdrive broke down, so he can't get out. And they need to keep testing these new fuel types for them to rebuild this hyperdrive for him to actually get off planet. And every time he tests a new potential drive, he has to go up in his spaceship and slingshot around the sun, and he gets close enough to the speed of light that 20 years passes back on the planet. So he keeps coming back, and it's and now we have another one for you to try. And he goes back up, and everyone is getting older and older, and he's staying the same, and it's very sad and emotional. But if you run the numbers on what they showed as his speed and the actual journey that he was taking, the amount of time dilation that would actually happen is he lost 4 minutes compared to the people down on the planet, as opposed to 20 years.
Yeah. I think
it's good job that you're trying to teach kids about time dilation, but do better.
I don't know. I'm torn because in one sense, I feel I haven't seen the movie, but the very fact that time dilation is even a concept introduced to children, maybe is that a step forward, or because in Interstellar, where the planet where they're an hour down here is going to be however many years up there, I was thinking they shouldn't be able to stand at that case. They should.
The gravity is that high.
Be crushed. So.
I had a lot of people asking me to do a similar breakdown of Interstellar.
Yeah. That's. What was it not? Kip Thorne got a bunch of papers out of that. Was it Kip Thorne? One of the he's a Nobel Prize winner now. It'll come to me. Annoyed I can't remember it. But they had a physicist advise on the simulations that they used for the black holes there, and because it was the first time that such a big Hollywood budget was available for simulations, so apparently 3 scientific papers were written off the back of it because it was the most visually detailed Einstein's general relativity equations had been rendered at that point in time, which is kind of cool. But
interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so another thing, which is reading scientific papers is hard, right? And I feel like even in an area where you have expertise, you need to really read with you need an understanding of statistics, you need an understanding of the scientific methods, you need a sort of keen eye to sense where they may be overstating their claim, because obviously now there's a pressure in academia to publish constantly, and there's unfortunately incentive structures to maybe overstate your discoveries a little bit. So to someone who maybe wants to go to the source and start reading scientific papers, what would you advise them? Because I feel like scientific literacy is a skill that takes a long time to develop. Is there a way that they can start doing it, or?
There's definitely many ways of starting to do it, and there's sort of a hierarchy. Step 1, if you are someone who has no experience reading scientific literature, but you want to know if something that someone is citing is actually good, there are a lot of things you can do that don't require any knowledge of science or statistics. It's just sort of high level. So step 1, you look up the paper and see, is this a study that was actually done, or is it some sort of review article talking about other studies? If this was a study that was done, was it done in a petri dish, in animals, or in humans? That's a very big distinction when it comes to making any type of health claim. If it was done in humans, was it actually a randomized controlled trial where it's placebo controlled, or was this some sort of observational study? So did they actually take 2 groups and say, we're going to give one group a compound and another group something we tell you is the compound, but it's not actually the compound, and measure the effects via some objective metrics? Or is it, we looked at a bunch of people and we found that the people who were drinking coffee ended up having a 2% lowered risk of a heart attack? That type of science can be good, but it's not as easy to use that to determine causation as some sort of randomized controlled trial. If you're seeing a study talking about something, or someone making a claim based on a study, the best way to get a good understanding or a good level of confidence that what they're talking about is accurate is if they're not citing a single study so much as a systematic review or meta-analysis of multiple studies. Because the thing is with science is that oftentimes, because there's a lot of random variability involved, especially for things with low effect sizes, like if you've got a drug that might increase the risk of something by 15% or help you by 15%, if you do a small trial, maybe occasionally there will be a trial that'll show that it actually doesn't work at all. But in aggregate, if there are 30 studies on the topic and the average increase is 15%, that's a much better piece of information rather than a single study with 10 people. So anytime I'm looking to actually make a determination of what is like the overview of scientific literature on a topic, my first step is, are there any meta-analyses and umbrella reviews published on this topic that try to do a full analysis of all the existing scientific literature and make a conclusion rather than drawing any type of actual actionable piece of information from a single study?
Yeah. How do you go about, I mean, do you mainly use, maybe getting too in the weeds, but things like Google Scholar, and then you go to all the other papers that are being referenced? Are there like particular sources or journals you start with first? I mean, where's your go-to?
There's a lot of different methods. So Google itself can be very useful just for finding recent meta-analyses.
Does the study exist is a big one. I can't even find it,
Yeah, that's always a big one. These days I will actually make use of a lot of AI tools to help with my process. Never to take what the AI says and treat that as gospel, but the deep research features of all the AI these days can be a useful way to get a sort of custom meta-analysis on the topic that then they'll make statements, and I look at that and see, okay, which studies are they citing? What does that line up with the claims that it's making? Then I look at those studies, and it's a lot of back and forth of, I look at a study and I see which papers have cited this and which papers does this cite. And I start building out a graph
diagram, right?
Of what is the most recent paper on this topic that seems to do a full, thorough review. What papers did it cite? Add those in, and then there's actually a tool called Research Rabbit, which makes this pretty effective, where you can go and put in different studies, and it'll create a visual graph of how they interlink in terms of what cites what. And you can sort of get a sense for which papers are more seminal within a topic, what is the most recent paper on a topic, and which papers do all of them seem to like source information from. And that gives me a good idea of just the interconnectivity, and sometimes it can source some like pretty cool ones. But usually it's, you start looking at the most recent papers on the topic, see what they cite, see which other papers might cite those same sources, and then build out a decent sense of what is the current state of information on a topic.
No, look, I mean, that sounds like a really rigorous approach. Do you think there's a sense in which, because you study engineering, my background is in physics, do you think that someone who doesn't have a STEM background is still placed? Because I mean, someone might listen to this and say, listen, I go in and they start talking about normal distributions, degrees of error, and all that sort of stuff, and far beyond various statistical methods. I still think, at least on my account, that even just looking at the abstract of going to a paper is worthwhile. Like, you've gone further than most to make it to that point, Yeah.
Yeah. I would never make a claim based on the abstract for a paper.
For sure.
But it's easy to, like, reading the abstract would often be a good way of saying if what the person is claiming that the paper said has even any relation to what the paper did. So, like, you can use it as a proof negative more than a proof positive.
I like that. It's also, it's a good, I feel like it can sometimes shrink or put in context the big claim that's being made. So like in a lot of sports science ones, there'll be some influencer that goes, new study says that this kind of bicep curl is the most effective. And then you read the abstract and it goes, we got 16 untrained males. And you think, okay, so you got like 16 white dudes in somewhere in like east of America, like, early 20s, probably like peak testosterone. And you got them to do a bunch of bicep curls. Their arms grew. That's crazy, dude. That's crazy.
Good job.
So, hope them.
When it comes to that sort of stuff, actually, Menno Henselman.
I follow him. He's so good.
He's so good.
Yeah, he seems really rigorous. Good takes. And at least that area of, I know, I'm not sure how you are and how much into online fitness you are, but I feel like that is
pretty involved.
Sick. That's a community that I feel like is swinging I mean, there's always the criticism of the science-based lifters and the Jeff Nippards and the Dr. Mike Israels and all that. But I feel like they've gained, rightly, a lot of popularity because there is a rigor and a love for methodology and a sense of just because, you can have fantastic genetics, take a lot of gear, and people will see your physique and then take whatever you say as gospel, when in reality, you are just the worst kind of evidence of one person.
Like, I could sell so many workout programs based on my physique, and I do like eat properly and exercise and all of that, but I have never had more than 5% body fat in my life. And that is predominantly due to genetics. Like, I have tried to put on weight so many times. It is so difficult for me to do so. Muscle, fat, anything. So the amount of muscle that I have is through extremely hard effort. But I have always had a six-pack because it does not matter if I exercise or not. I do not have the body fat to hide my abs. And based on that, I could sell you a million belly fat burning programs.
Summer shred, baby. Summer shred.
The visual. Yeah, I'd be like, check out my biceps. I shall sell you the program.
For those listening, he's got a cut bicep. Then there's no denying that. So, if you're not seeing the visual here, you're missing out. So, no, but it's. But I feel. I mean, look, when I started looking on fitness, you think you want to. Who's the most jacked person? I'm going to listen to what that person says. But
ironically, I actually, in more recent years, have realized that my lack of body fat has really hurt me.
Oh, real? What, like in terms of hormones type stuff, or
in terms of bone density?
Crikey.
So I have the genetic markers that would indicate that my bone density is likely to be worse than 98% of the population.
Oh, man. Damn.
And on top of that, I mean, that makes sense because my mother has osteoporosis. And I guess a year and a half now, I went to the doctor because I had pain at multiple places in my spine and my wrist. And I ended up, I had a wrist fracture from 5 years ago that didn't heal properly and lots of different back pain. So I went and found that I had 2 compression fractures in my spine, 1 in my wrist. And they're like, well, you just can't do much. And I had to push them. This is not
what do you mean
normal
you can't do much? You shouldn't get osteoporosis. I mean,
Yeah. So I pushed to get a bone density scan, and they begrudgingly prescribed it. So I went and got a DEXA scan and found out that I have the bone density of a very healthy 120-year-old.
What? So you're a full away from it's like hip replacement territory. Jesus.
It's technically osteopenia for my age bracket as opposed to full-on osteoporosis.
I mean,
but it's on the border.
I mean, still, that's not a good. Right. Okay. What have you been doing? I mean, yeah.
So after doing a very
you're all my skills
on this topic,
here we go.
Unfortunately, it's actually not something where there's a lot of good options for, because the vast majority of research into this is for postmenopausal women who, based on the changes in their estrogen production, are basically having higher bone turnover rate, and therefore they lose bone density. And most of the drugs are essentially saying, let's lower that bone turnover that is estrogen influenced and stop the negative progression. There is very, very little that's this is how to put on more bone.
God.
Essentially, the only real way to do it, so far, based on the current totality of evidence, there's a couple of drugs that could be a little bit helpful, but basically your body responds to stress. The degree to which you load the skeleton is the degree to which you can potentially put on new bone. This is why heavy resistance training is associated with increased bone density.
So you're just deadlifting, right? You're just out there.
It's heavy deadlift, squats, all of that. Not just that, though. So let me see if I can.
For those listening, he's got off camera. He's getting something.
You can only spend a certain amount of time at the gym. And also for me, because I have multiple compression fractures in my spine and wrist, it actually is very difficult to do extremely heavy loaded exercise. So it's a little catch-22 situation. However, there's also a lot of data indicating that people who go from being obese to losing a lot of weight will lose a lot of bone density. It's actually a big problem now with GLP-1 users. Oftentimes, they're losing body mass very quickly, and then their skeleton says, hey, let's offload a lot of the calcium from our bones, and they start developing bone density issues. Conversely, though, if you spend a lot of the day wearing a heavy-weighted vest, you can trick your body into thinking that it's heavier than it is. So this is a 30-pound weighted vest that I try to spend 3 or 4 hours a day wearing, and then also doing some like jumping up and down, which during the moment of landing, the amount of force that goes through the skeleton is like several times body weight. So as long as you do it in a very controlled manner so as to not actually put undue like stress on parts of the spine that I shouldn't, my hope is that that will eventually produce enough increased stimulus for my skeletal system, combining that with the right sorts of micronutrients that I'm like not megadosing on, but like making sure I'm at the high end of the consumption. To just provide the building blocks, because like just taking calcium is not going to make you grow.
No, you got to have a cocktail of different practices and stimuli, right?
But if you create the load, like the stress on your skeleton, and you have the excess resources necessary to actually create new growth, then the combination thereof theoretically should be able to lead towards bone growth.
Damn, well, I hope that works out. I mean, I'm all for Goku training at any point in time, yeah.
Just add a couple pounds per day and soon.
Man, you're going Super Saiyan. God damn. Yeah, well, because one of the things I wanted to ask you was, because you've done a lot of these that I've seen on TikTok, whereby you've used yourself as a guinea pig. And I saw it with the carrot juice, where you did an amazing thing. You saw how much your skin complexion changed with the beta carotene intake. That was the main primary. Yeah.
It was not just the beta carotene; it was also the lycopene. So that's like a very key ingredient. In general, people are very familiar with call it urban legend, but actually has a grounding in truth. You eat too many carrots, you turn orange. That's true, because beta-carotene in orange is a carotenoid that when you consume enough of it, it does make its way to the skin and produce an orangey complexion. But lycopene, which is the primary carotenoid in tomatoes, has more of a reddish hue. And I found several studies showing that when they gave people large amounts of beta-carotene and lycopene, the change in skin tone that produced in both Caucasians and black people was rated as being more attractive than an equivalent suntan, because it gives more of like a golden glow as opposed to just like orangey bad stuff. The problem is that beta carotene supplementation is actually associated with increased risk of certain health issues. Like you don't really want to just take it in supplement form. But carrots, the carotenoid bioavailability is not very high because it's bound up in the cellular walls. Most of it ends up getting secreted as opposed to absorbed. It's like if you eat a raw carrot, anywhere between 15 and 30% of the beta carotene gets absorbed. Same with tomatoes and the lycopene. Most of it just goes right through. So I did a lot of research into different ways that things we can do to improve that. And basically found that if you blend it enough to break down those cell walls, simmer it over heat, and combine it with the right amount of fat, then you can essentially create almost like mini liposomal encapsulations for these carotenoids. And you can bump up that absorption to almost 70%. So I formulated a soup recipe that the bulk of it is just carrots and tomatoes, properly blended and simmered in with the right amount of like basically extra virgin olive oil as the fat, because, why not just load up on that? Add in a little bit of it's like emulsifiers to make sure that it properly stays, and a lot of fresh ginger, garlic,
make it healthy
and I created this. Yeah, it's actually a very tasty soup, but I make it in like my Instapot. It's like an 8-quart thing, and then spend a couple hours making a massive batch, put it in mason jars, and put them in my like chest freezer, and then for the span of a couple months, I would just every breakfast I wake up in the morning, I pop a jar into the microwave, and then I blend it with some protein powder, and it ended up being the macros were perfectly balanced, like 1-1-1 protein, fat, carbs.
Dang.
So it was like, 400 calories.
It's a good breakfast.
Morning.
Healthier than what most people have, for sure. So
it's great. And then the first month that I did it, I remember right before starting, I'd been hanging out with a good friend of mine, and then a month in, I saw her at actually this Hanukkah party, and she looks at me, she's like, "Are you working with a new bronzer company or something? Because your skin is looking very glowy." This is in the middle of December. I hadn't been outside in weeks.
Very intentionally. Sweet.
I was like, "Yep, this is working."
Have you kept up with that recipe every so often, or was that just too much tomato?
No, every so often I still make it. I don't do it every day, but it's on my rotation. Actually, for a while, and I still might end up doing this, at some point, I would love to create a little company where I create pre-made frozen soups that are essentially scientifically optimized for different subsets of micronutrients to formulate in a way to maximize bioavailability for different sort of subsets. Like if you're having an ideal diet, you got to have your macronutrients, your like protein, fat, carbs, your micronutrients, which are all the building blocks your body needs. But then there's hundreds of phytochemicals, the polyphenols, the flavonols, all the different antioxidants and things that are biologically active that are contributions to a healthy diet. But we don't really have any good sense of like exactly how much everyone needs because they're not essential nutrients. But a maximally healthy diet, I would say you take like the 4 or 5 broad categories of these phytonutrients and you do have a rotation where you're actually consuming them throughout the year, especially because like, we evolved to sort of, you don't necessarily need everything at all times, but over the span of a year, you should sort of be cycling through. So I think it would be a lot of fun to formulate like, 5 or so different core soups that you cycle through that just make sure that you get all of your different phytonutrients and they're like frozen fresh, formulated to have maximum bioavailability, and just like pop them in the microwave.
Scientific
good to go.
seasonal soups. Yeah, because there's also what you've also mentioned there is it's not even just that third layer of the phytochemicals, but it's also ingesting them in a way that it makes them more predisposed to be absorbed, because you might even be getting them, but because of the way you're preparing your carrots, your broccoli, your kale, your spinach, or the order you're eating them in, it might be preventing their absorption. Because I think there was another one, and I think I even saw a video about this from you, where if you blend a banana with some of your other fruits, there's a sort of chemical in the banana that prevents absorption. So you're
This is my most controversial
video
really?
of all time. I stumbled into it, mate. Please go ahead. Are we team banana or are we not team banana?
Made it. See, what's funny is like I've always loved bananas. I was like one of those weird kids who even like banana Laffy Taffies.
I'm afraid I don't get that reference, but what's a Laffy Taffy?
It's any American in the audience will definitely be cringing right now, because that was always the one where it's like the fake banana flavor that everyone hates.
Oh, fake banana is good. Fake banana is good with me
banana
too.
bread.
Yeah, you're cool.
Yeah. So I made this video, I guess like a year and a half ago now, 2 years, I don't know, where I did something which I don't normally do, which I start off with a more sensationalist statement and then dial it back, as opposed to sort of just like the very even keeled. So I started off by saying like, stop putting bananas in your berry smoothies because they're destroying its nutritional value. And then I cited a study talking about how they did an experiment where they added bananas blended into this like complex of polyphenols, which they'd actually extracted from chocolate, and they found that the activation of this enzyme called polyphenol oxidase causes a breakdown of these polyphenols from the chocolate, and essentially like removes their activity from the combination. So by blending the banana with the polyphenol the banana with the polyphenols, it is reducing the total polyphenol content in the end result. And you had all sorts of people like stitching response videos being like, oh, well, they only used one little polyphenol, not like everything you would get from berries. And that doesn't mean that it's not healthy. It just means that it's like a little bit less of that polyphenol and it's fine. And then I had to do a response being like, actually, guys, I did my homework. There's actually a dozen other studies which support this, saying that it acts on multiple other polyphenols they would actually find within all the different berries and things you would normally put in a smoothie. And it's not that this is making it unhealthy. It is, if you are someone who is interested in optimizing your nutritional endeavors, then it is better to not reduce the polyphenolic compound of the content of your smoothies by blending the banana in. And in fact, you can tell this very easily. If you take a smoothie that's like just berries, yogurt, and protein powder, and then you add a banana into half of it and not a banana into half of it, and put it in the fridge for a day, take it out, and see the next day, one is going to be brown and nasty, and that's the banana one, because that polyphenol oxidase has been acting like crazy, and it will not taste good. It will not be as healthy as the one without the banana. The berries will still have oxidized somewhat, but not nearly to the same degree. It's why bananas brown very quickly. It's because of that polyphenol oxidase. It's also why apples brown pretty quickly, because they also have not the same level as bananas, but still a reasonable amount.
Gotcha.
So no, it does not destroy the nutritional value of your smoothies, but if you want to optimize your like nutritional content, I no longer put bananas in my berry smoothies.
Damn. Would you do the destructive smoothie where you'd have the banana and the apple separately, and so you're like, okay, I've got the apple banana the destructo
smoothie
juice, and then the nutritional.
Well, what I do sometimes, like I still enjoy having like a banana, peanut butter, protein powder, yogurt, because if I'm
tastes
like,
good.
just needing a lot of calories and protein, it tastes good, and there's not really much in the way of polyphenols there that will really like interact with it. The only potential bit is sometimes I'll add cocoa powder into that smoothie, and I have to just be okay with the fact that I will not be getting the same polyphenol content from the cocoa powder as otherwise.
But it's also a matter of degrees, isn't it? I feel like, it's when you get nerds thinking, oh man, my guilty pleasure is putting a banana in my berry smoothie, and you also have people out there being like, I feel guilty about the second pizza. you know. So yeah,
Exactly. That's the thing. Like, I'm
no,
not
of
saying
course not.
don't
But of
do
course
it.
not.
If it makes you, if it makes you enjoy your life more, then by all means go for it. But if you're a weirdo like me who likes to just optimize every aspect of life in a way that, especially anything that doesn't require added effort, like doing
I mean,
things
not adding
on
a
top of
banana
my
is
existing
freaking
activities-
easy, right? Yeah. So yeah.
That's the thing.
That's
It's like
great
if I
effort.
could determine a recipe in advance that does not require added effort, that just requires a decision. That's my favorite type of optimization.
Yeah, no. The things of what not to do is extremely important, or what not to add. Okay, so the soup's the banana. Anything else that's sort of like become a sort of permanent fixture of your lifestyle from experiments you've done, or a semi-permanent
from
rotation,
experiments.
nutrition, exercise from experiments, or
There's all sorts of small things. I have to think. Let's see. I mean, in terms of the way I work out, there's.
I mean, I'm always trying out stuff. Yeah,
incorporate so many different types of like
Yeah.
research papers, like the recent study that you should wait 3 minutes in between resistance training. That there's rarely time to do that if you're going to a crowded gym and people are like, "Are you done with that machine?" But in an ideal world,
Your friendly New Yorkers.
I would love to be able to. Oh yeah. In an ideal world, I would love to be able to wait 3 minutes in between sets and be cycling it, so I actually maintain a higher elevated heart rate and am more efficient with my usage of time. Similarly, I'll try to be more explosive on the contraction and then have a slower eccentric load. Then there is actually a lot of different things that I have to modify my
course, 'cause
workouts
of where
for
you're at.
because
Yeah.
of. Well, it's also like I have, speaking of the bone stuff, I also have joint hypermobility, which is essentially defective collagen production in all of my connective tissue. So I'm very easily injured doing any type of physical activity. And my entire time at the gym is always like a balance of what hurts today
Damn. Okay.
versus how much I can actually do.
Yeah. So, well, in which case, again, I feel like it's that skill set that you develop, which probably becomes extremely useful, whereby you're able to, on the day, test and iterate, given a sort of background of knowledge of not only your own body, but the literature that surrounds the field of exercise and sports science. So,
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into just what I'm deciding to do on the fly for a given day. And of course, always tracking it all because you don't
data,
really
of course,
increase
please.
and improve what you don't track.
Yeah. So you need that.
I've done a lot of things where I try to track and optimize my sleep, but that's
Where are you on that? That look of dismay I know well. Are you not a good sleeper? Because I very much.
no. I'm actually ironically I am
Okay.
a good sleeper, and it makes the scientist part of me a little bit frustrated because when it comes to trying, sleep trackers are some of the easiest type of
Yeah, man,
trackers you can get.
I'm rocking
And,
the Oura Ring.
Usually I'm
Yeah.
wearing. Yeah, I mean, for a long time I was wearing the Oura Ring, the Ultrahuman Ring, the Apple Watch, and then I would periodically do a ground truth using like a Muse EEG headband to measure that as well. So like, I actually accidentally recycled my Oura Ring a little while ago. And I was very
whoops.
sad. But I would track my sleep using every metric possible. Ironically, I'm a very good sleeper. And the scientist in me wants to be able to experiment with so many things to improve my sleep. But it's hard when I don't need to improve.
Oh yeah, you
my
can just nod off.
sleep
Yeah.
all that
Well,
much.
I'm so happy for you. That's great.
great.
That's fantastic.
I mean, I did find things. It's more the edge cases that I
Yeah.
had to deal with. Like, I spent a while testing out a ton of different sleep masks to figure out which one would work best. I did a video like a couple years ago on sleep masks that went viral, and then every sleep mask company was like, "We want to send you our sleep masks." So I spent quite a while testing. Now, anytime someone comes to visit me and they don't have a sleep mask, I'm like, "Hey, would you like to choose from my
opens up a
selection
cupboard.
and see which one you like?" At some point, I will be making a video on like the sleep mask Olympics because there is no one size fits
it's
all
just
for
the
everyone.
head shape as well,
But
right?
There is data indicating that it's head shape. It's do you like the
Yeah.
pressure on your eyes or not? Do your ears stick out more or not? Do you like prefer the eye cups versus wraparound? Are you a side sleeper? Are you a back sleeper? Do you want to be able to listen to something when going to sleep? Like there's various headphone based like sleep masks that are actually pretty nice. There's some of the ones that can shine light in your eyes to wake you up, which I've yet to try one that I like. But there was a couple of studies indicating that even if you sleep in a relatively dark room, adding a sleep mask to your sleep routine does enhance sleep quality. The difference between no light and zero light, or a little bit of light and no light, is
significant. Yeah, no, I'm a sleep mask advocate, but similarly have gone through so many in the hopes of finding that perfect one. And also, when I'm asleep, a sleep jack takes the mask off, so I wake up with it somewhere flown across the room, and I'm finding my unconscious self. I'm like, why, dude? We're on the same team.
That's another one. It's like, how much elastic do you need to try to keep it on your face?
I gotta freaking lock myself down to prevent ruining the experiment, because it's hard to keep track of how long it was on my face if it was. Oh wait, go at some point.
Well, that's the thing, though. There's sleep latency, like how quickly you fall asleep, and then there's sleep quality while you're asleep. And those are two different. And if you wake up a lot, going back to sleep. So even if you're someone who will lose their sleep mask in the middle of the night, it might still be helpful for the initial period. And also it could be helpful, like if you wake up in the morning and some light is starting to come into the room, even the ability to very quickly just tug it back over your eyes and go to sleep, as opposed to not, that can be a large difference in your morning sleep quality, even if it has shifted, and then be able to just
if it's an hour a day, that like adds up really quickly. That can be, another night's worth of sleep a week, and suddenly you're feeling a lot more rested. So no, I've got a lot of spares, and I carry one with me wherever I go, even though I don't plan on staying the night. I have a sleep mask with me because I need that. I need anything I can get in the battle against insomnia. So.
Do you normally have a hard time falling asleep?
I have a hard time falling asleep, staying asleep, and I can't sleep in. So it's a triple threat with me. The most, if I sleep past 7:30, I've lucked out. Like I naturally wake up very early. I've sort of cracked in the last year or two falling asleep, doing a lot of the typical things that they recommend. No technology. What's worked for me is actually just journaling in bed, because eventually I just get so tired of my own shit that I just want to. So that works, but I wake up in the middle of the night. Just is.
When I have the times where I'm having a hard time falling asleep because my mind is racing too much, usually what I'll end up doing is I'll put my sleep mask on, and then I'll also put on another headphone sleep mask on top of my normal one, because I like the feeling of one and the functionality of the other. And I will choose a piece of fiction that I will set. Normally I listen at like 3x speed, but I will set this to 0.5x speed at the lowest possible volume that I can still perceive the words. Then set a bookmark and a half-hour sleep timer. And when my mind is like having a hard time falling asleep, it's because it's ruminating on the past, on the future. But if I give it fictional imagery to both create like a generative scene within my mind and pull my focus to be sort of external as opposed to on rumination, then it's like it follows it at the edge of the awareness enough so that the stimuli are not disruptive in terms of like the actual sound, but it's enough to pull my mind outside of its rumination process, and usually will let me fall asleep pretty quickly. Sometimes if the book is too engaging, like that could be a problem, and in those cases I'll use something like there's a podcast called LeVar Burton Reads, that he just like chooses a random short story and reads it to you in his nice, soothing voice. And it's like, I have no connection to this story. Usually, I've listened to that podcast so many times, and I don't know if I've ever gotten through a single story.
Perfect, yes.
It's like story time, going to bed.
It's fantastic.
So it tends to work very well.
Yeah, my go-to, I might try that actually. The one I use when I'm trying to fall asleep on flights, I can't remember the name of it now. It's CGP Grey with the host of Numberphile. And they just talk back and forth, and I've never made it through one of their podcasts. I like them both as creators, but they shouldn't they just talk. I'm out. It's good. It's fantastic. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
So of course we have to talk about our back and forth over AI. I saw your most recent video.
Oh yeah.
And I think we agree. I've convinced by your points. I think you're right on that. AI can definitely be used in a creative way. I think, and I think to a certain extent, which is definitely my fault, we were talking cross purposes at a bit, because for those listeners who don't know, at least my understanding of how this exchange has gone down, I made a video where I was basically having a crash out about generative video, AI, and deepfakes, where I started it with a bit hyperbolically, but valid people latched onto it, where I said, what is the use case for generative AI video other than destroying democracy? And I was saying, I think it poses a lot of threats to the information ecosystem and democracy, because a large part of how we find out what's true in the world, we trust what we see, and that has implications to the justice system, and deepfake porn's terrible and all that. But then, and you made a video where we're presenting a much more optimistic view, where you said, look, actually there's a lot of really cool use cases for it, and there's a way which we can combat deepfakes and misinformation technology for that. And one of your points was democratizing creativity, where I now I see where you're coming from. At the time I was sort of thinking, I'm not sure. I feel like it's a really seductive way of not making creative decisions. So yeah, is that a fair summation of our exchanges in your opinion? Tell me if I missed anything else.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good back and forth.
So yeah, I think if I understand your position correctly, your position is, yeah, there are a lot of potential downsides for this technology, but objectively speaking, there's a lot of really exciting uses for Gen AI video. And I mean, we just have to, like, it's wrong not to recognize these, basically. And people can incorporate it into their workflow, use it for inspiration for their workflow, use it as a part of their workflow, and all of that. Is that fair?
Essentially, yes. It can be used as a tool that is more powerful than a paintbrush, more powerful than a texture generator. It's use words to describe what you want to appear. And for someone who has a creative mind, but not the technical skill of the artist required to produce these visual effects, it's something that can very much enhance their ability to enact a creative vision. It's something that myself, as a jack of all trades, like, I have done a lot of graphics design work over time, but I'm not really a painter style artist. So a lot of my work is usually using compositions, taking different things, combining it together in Photoshop, doing things. And like, generative AI has made it very useful, very easy for me to create things at a higher level than I was able to before. Rarely just saying, I'm going to take this and turn it into something that I'll use as the final product. But like, it allows me to take different pieces and modify, craft, iterate, and basically let me produce stuff that I otherwise would not have been. Ironically, one of the biggest uses that I've had for generative AI in the last year is just, you know how sometimes when someone says something to you in a group chat or a text message and you want to respond with an appropriate meme, but you just can't find the meme that you want?
I think I'm too chronically online to have ever had this issue. I normally have a repository.
You always
I have the right meme. Yeah. Most of the time.
Okay,
but please go ahead.
Imagine that you have the right meme that perfectly encapsulates your point. But you know what would drive home the meme more? If rather than Darth Vader yelling at Luke, it was Darth Vader yelling at your friend who you want to send this meme to.
Yeah, putting them in. Yeah. No, I mean, like, that some of them that come out are, like, admittedly hilarious. And I think even, because I follow, I mean, it's not necessarily the best place for it, but I follow these subreddits for OpenAI, Singularity, all these different discussions, and it's fascinating because I feel like that's a really, I need to have some form of seeing what people are doing with it. And even just prompting things like ChatGPT to come up with a new meme format, sometimes they're funny. Like, just it seems like organically from a prompt, and that's fascinating. The
humor aspect has gotten way, way better in the last 3 months.
Freaking really interesting. Really, really interesting. And there's definitely a lot of TikTokers who have blown up recently. Have you seen the Stormtrooper vlog guy on TikTok?
No.
It's a page which is, I think, using VO3 from Google, where the premise is that you've got two stormtroopers and they're vlogging their antics being part of the Star Wars universe. So they're saying, we just landed in Tatooine, and they're bantering back and forth, and he's saying, like, my friend can't shoot, we crash landed. And it's really funny. It's a great sort of like satire, kind of like side story that would be amazing to watch in the Star Wars universe. And to your point, that would be, I mean, impossible to make as just like a fun fan project because of the like cost involved. But using this tool, you can make it happen.
It would take way too much effort.
Yeah. I mean, animating it, you could probably do it, but that would be also painstaking. And sadly, because of it's
the sort of thing that you used to get on like the old Flash video internet.
Newgrounds. It would be Newgrounds Gold, man. I miss that. I mean, it still exists. I say I miss that website, but
exactly. I miss those days.
Yeah. Well, the economy of the internet's changed, right? I mean, I've watched various different animators I've followed on YouTube for a long time, and a lot of their stuff is, I mean, the longer it is, the harder it is to make, right? So it's just very difficult to get those hour-long animations out.
So speaking of humor and AI, though,
sorry.
Speaking of humor and AI. One thing that I've always found about humor is one of the primary ways to generate humor is contrasting things that people would not otherwise expect in a surprising sort of way. And that is one of the types of humor that AI is the best at doing with the right type of prompting, because it can pull completely disparate topics and combine them together in ways that humans actually take a little while longer to do, as opposed to some of like the observational humor, which is a little bit more in the realm of humanity these days, and like AI is not quite as good at it. So for example, just now I went and typed in, act as an expert comedian, tell me a yo mama joke about Star Wars in the style of a university professor. And listen to this. I'll be reading it for the first time, and let's just...
Doing this live.
Your maternal figure possesses such an extraordinarily dense mass-to-volume ratio that when she traversed the Death Star's corridors, the Imperial engineers were compelled to recalibrate their artificial gravity generators not once, but twice. Furthermore, her gravitational field proved so remarkably intense that Darth Vader's breathing apparatus began experiencing atmospheric pressure irregularities, leading him to comment, and I quote from the official Imperial records, "I find your lack of fitness disturbing."
It's good. It's good. You know, out of nothing. Out of nothing. Have you ever heard of or read the work of Scott Dickers? Scott Dickers, Dickers. He's one of the founders of the Onion News Network, and he's got a few books out on writing comedy.
Oh, okay.
The first one, three of them. The first one's just called How to Write Funny, and then the second one's called How to Write More Funny or whatever. And to your point there, in the first book, he has a series of what he calls funny filters, which he claims are sort of approaches to create things that are reliably funny. And it's been a while since I've read the book, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he says, you know, you can never fully predict what's going to be funny for everyone. There's no such thing as a universal a joke which is guaranteed to make everyone laugh. And one of the pleasures about humor is that it's mysterious. But he said, I found that if you have these sort of what he calls funny filters, these ingredients, and you consistently incorporate one or more of them, then you'll find you'll reach some sort of material which is generally considered by most people to be funny. And one of the primary ingredients, to your point, was contrast and comparing and sort of extremes. And the others, and there's sort of overlap, but there's things like parody, there's shock, obviously, there's sort of slapstick, and there's character. Yeah. So to that, he'd probably evaluate it and you say, well, you know, you've not only got comparison there, but you've got character humor, because you've got, you know, these characters we're familiar with, Darth Vader and such and so on, being put into the joke. So,
yeah, there was a study published on humor like quite a few years ago now, looking at what aspects of humor are entirely cross-cultural and seem to be more baked into humanity.
Can I guess? It's got to be slapstick. It's got to be slapstick, surely. Physical humor, I would have thought.
It is 100% slapstick.
Nailed it.
It is completely cross-cultural. No matter your language, no matter your context, even animals will laugh at slapstick to some degree.
Yeah. I found eons ago, me and my friends, we did an improv tour across Florida, and we'd only ever performed in the UK. We performed in Edinburgh, Cambridge, Oxford, London, all that sort of stuff. But we were sort of wondering how the sense of humor might differ, you know, being in Florida, right? And we were in Fort Lauderdale, Orlando, and we found, you know, if we cracked what we would consider to be a witty joke, you know, that would get some laughs. But if someone fell over on stage, God, that was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. The sort of slapstick. If someone got injured, comedy gold. We would walk off stage thinking,
have you ever seen?
Why did we tone our skills? What was the point of it?
Like a little Three Stooges action. Yeah. Have you ever seen The Play That Goes Wrong?
Yes, I've even taken a workshop with The Play That Goes Wrong. So, what's it called? Something like Magic Theatre or whatever. Yeah, no, I've taken a workshop with those guys. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the funniest shows that I have seen on stage. And they blend the slapstick with the, like, just witty
British embarrassment and all that sort of stuff.
Like,
yeah,
it's... Like, I am very, very unlikely to burst out laughing when watching any type of comedy. But, like, it's one of the few shows that actually did it for me there.
Props to them. You know what's really interesting about them? They formed an improv troupe. They were initially an improv troupe. And have you ever been to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival by any chance? Or Edinburgh?
No.
Anyway, big, one of the biggest arts festivals, certainly over here. For the month of August, the population of the city sort of doubles. And you have like 4 weeks of just thousands of shows. Every nook and cranny of the city is turned into a venue. The back of a van is a venue. Lecture halls are venues. I mean, it's just inundated with theatre all hours of the day. They had been trying for years to get a slot at one of the big theatre companies, because the way it would work is that a theatre company would sort of rent a venue and host acts within that space. They've been trying for years to get a slot at Pleasance, which is one of the more prestigious ones. And they were taking this improv show and never did it. And one year they just sort of said, screw it, we're going to try a scripted show because we're just not getting anywhere with improv. And that was the sort of the germ that became the play that goes wrong. And then they just took over the West End. And then after that, after some success, they then finally got to tour their improv show because they were like, we want to do this. This is really good. So, yeah.
It's like we've demonstrated our chops with this one. Now people will give us the forbearance to watch our improv.
Exactly. But it also goes to show that, to a certain extent, I think improv's more fun to perform than watch in a lot of cases. But that's just... Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I love playing improv games. Back in my university, there was an improv troupe that would hold tryouts every semester. Basically, you had to join them for 3 hours worth of improv games, and if they liked you, they would invite you to join. I never had the time to actually join their group because I was taking 22 credits of engineering courses every semester, but I would always go to the tryouts because it was a lot of fun.
I still think it's one of the most organic ways to have fun and entertain an audience. If you're doing it right, because you can be so in the moment and so reactive and meet people where they're at. But at the same time, it is also, to a certain extent, I feel like show-offy of look what we can do. Look what we can spin out of thin air.
Yeah.
So
that's true.
So in terms of the swing back to AI a little bit, I fluctuate on this because I actually, one of my friends works for OpenAI and he took a job over in San Fran about nearly a year ago now. And part of me wants to be really optimistic because I think there's so many applications of, if we're taking AI in the broadest possible sense, for it to be positive, medical innovations. I certainly think that even got to concede that in terms of, ChatGPT or generative text AI, there's so many ways that people are using it to refine their processes, or even there's educational prospects there. I feel like whatever nebulous intelligence I possess is partly just because I had teachers who I really resonated with, who taught in a way that I liked and was receptive to. And had I not had those experiences, I think I wouldn't be, as into the topics I am. I wouldn't, those flames of curiosity wouldn't have been fanned. So if there's a technology that can make it such that every person possesses access to an entity that would listen to them and try and re-explain things 100 different ways and to find a way that meets them where they're at such that they can gain enthusiasm for a subject, that's amazing. I am so for that because that's also a net way of improving the literacy and intelligence of the population, because that's what I want. But I just worry that, and I also have friends who are teachers, and you see things, anecdotes from various different schools, that the net temptation from so many of these technologies is going to be to offload cognition, and rather than use it as you said, as for research, we go, you almost use it as a starting off point of saying, okay, well, what are the papers has, deep research given me? Okay, I'll start there and I'll start to build out my map, right? And this is maybe what spit out at you as, I assume, a sort of first hypothesis. You go, okay, that sort of mini personalized literature review is this. I'm going to go find out if that's true or not. But I think so many people won't do that. Is this something that worries you? I mean, if you can cure me of my pessimism, I am so all ears, dude.
I wish I could fully cure you of it, but I absolutely agree that the offloading of cognition is going to be a massive problem going forward. Like, anyone in their schooling years right now, one of the best ways to really learn to think is to learn to write. It is to force people to put their thoughts on paper in an organized way and actually see if it makes sense, as opposed to feel that it makes sense. Like the Feynman technique of, you don't really know something until you can explain it to a 5-year-old. Being forced to explain something, writing is essentially explaining via paper. If they had to explain it to a human being, that would also be good. But writing is such an important thing for people to learn. The ability to offload that to an AI means that you will see a lot of circumstances where people do not, in fact, learn the proper level of critical thinking skills. And it is definitely a massive challenge for the entire education industry to figure out how is it possible to still do this. And I think the answer, though, is the same as the problem. And that is AI education software. Because, I've said for years, the number of friends that I have who say, oh, I'm just not a math person, therefore XYZ. The reason why people are not a math person is because math, unlike most other topics taught in school, is completely cumulative. If you do not understand one topic because you had a poor teacher, they just they couldn't explain it to you properly, they didn't take the time to fix a misunderstanding you have, then the next year suddenly
you fell off.
You
yeah, and then you started identifying with the idea
because,
of not being a maths person, and so you tune out.
Yeah, it's like it must be you because you just didn't immediately pick it up, and then you're not a math person. But if you have an AI education software that can say, we are with you for as long as it takes to learn this bit. We are continuously testing you in a way that requires you to work out problems on this scratch pad, which is being vetted by the AI, and it shows it is able to notice when you have difficulties and prompt you in not a I give you the solution manner, but to use the Socratic method to try and pull the solution out of you. Then that is a way to teach math that I think is better than any normal math program that we currently have. And it's already being implemented in various ways. Similarly, I do think that we will start developing education programs where we will force students to write about topics on the AI console where they are typing it, and it is watching you type and showing that you're not copy pasting or just copying from something else, because it's going to be a locked screen where, yes, you could have another device going where you're sort of going back and forth, but even that, you'll be able to develop certain heuristic algorithms, which will be, does this resemble a human being's generative thought process, or does it feel like they're just copying over bits of text in spurts? If what they're doing is using an AI to get ideas and then writing about it themselves, well, you know what? That's actually what we want, because that is how cognition is going to work going forward. It is going to be using these tools as a part of your thinking process, which then still requires you to synthesize and write for yourself. So I do think that if we have education software that is able to do that and enforce this sort of actual rational thought in a properly gated platform, then you can have the best of both worlds, which is a teacher that is individualized to the student, helping them through each individual challenge and prompting them along the lines that no normal human being could do, because it doesn't know everything and it can't take that amount of time. But enforce the fact that you're not just taking the answer from some AI, then it could actually be great.
Yeah, I think that's the best possible outcome. I taught maths. I did maths tutoring, physics tutoring for a number of years, even while outside of university working other jobs. And I remember I had two students who they'd sort of fallen out of the GCSE pathway, so it's up to 16 years old here. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the UK education system. So it's sort of like SATs. I'm sure you heard the comparison. And I was teaching one of them, and you're allowed to use calculators in the exam. That's encouraged for most of them. And we were going through problems, and something eventually clicked with me where I realized that this person had no tactile or sort of intuitive understanding of numbers, whereby they couldn't get, they would have a problem whereby, let's just say, for example, it was something, it'd be like 17 times 20. And if they type it wrong into their calculator, they might get an answer which is like 50,000. And they would have no, because they didn't have a rational understanding or some sort of intuitive understanding of numbers, they couldn't get a sense that they must have made a mistake. And I had to explain this to them, where I said, look, you need to learn your times tables. And they said, why? And I said, well, because actually you're the second check here. Even if I'm not expecting you to do your 17 times tables, or your 11, or your 11 times 99 or whatever, even though you can work these out, you should be able to work them out. But you need to have some grasp that allows you to just call stuff. And so even though in an exam, yes, you'll have a calculator, you should be able to do the exam without it and give like rough answers, not the exact ones. That's kind of it. It's a cognitive tool that you're leaning on and outsourcing the sort of precise number crunching. Yeah. And I think what we're discovering here is that there's going to be a separation whereby there's going to be a lot of people who similarly know how to do long multiplication, but now getting a hang of a calculator, and so they're thinking I can just run off into the distance. So with AI, they say, I know how to be creative without AI, but I'm going to use it as a tool, and so it's this analogous to someone receiving a calculator who knows numbers. But you're also going to get a group of people who go, I don't need to learn anything about numbers now. I've got a number machine. And that's going to actually really hamper and put a ceiling on where they can go with it. So
I think, as with many other aspects of society, though, what you're going to see is increased specialization in different domains. Because it used to be that everyone would have to have a certain level of memory, a certain level of anyone from our generation probably has, on average, a worse understanding of things like times tables than from the previous generation that didn't grow up with the same level of calculators doing a lot of this for them. But at the same time, we also didn't have to really memorize logarithm tables, and even the for trigonometry, we only had to memorize the basic
sine 30,
60,
sine
90
90
angle things. Yeah. Whereas it used to be, people would have to memorize much, much more because they didn't have access to these calculators. And honestly, that's not particularly useful brain space. Like, because we have the tools to obviate the need for such memorization, there's a very small subset of the population for whom it is very useful to actually have that knowledge at their fingertips. Similarly, the fact that anyone has a phone that can do math means that there is a much larger spectrum of the world of mathematics that could be potentially overlapping in Venn diagrams with like potential usefulness in everyday life that is not really necessary for most people to know because it is so easy for them to do. For the people who need to use math in their primary profession and need to develop systems using it, and it requires a high level intuitive understanding of it, you still have people who cannot rely on like heuristics for everything, or cannot rely on external tools, and they need to know it themselves. But the number of people who need that level of expertise has shrunk. And I think we're going to see that a lot with AI, which is, it is going to be able to answer most problems for people, just across life. And the vast majority of people are going to be able to offload most of what they need to think about, except for the things that really matter to them in their area of focus and expertise. And we're going to start seeing an even greater degree of narrow specialization that where people are making use of AI tools, but still are really focusing on that sort of thought for themselves. And they're not going to have certain baseline levels of understanding that even we took for granted.
I think you're right. I mean, on the memorizing sine 12, sine 25, sine 30, or what perhaps people in earlier generations to us would have to do, I agree, whereby lots of rote memorization was used as a proxy for just a general intelligence test. And taking a step back further, I mean, I would even say that the vast majority of people don't need to learn trigonometry at all. If there's any mathematics I want everyone to learn, it's probability theory, statistics, right? Because that comes back to our scientific literacy at the start here, right? You know, what does it mean for, you know, something to be within 1 sigma for a study? Why is that significant? Why is the normal distribution something you should know? And
I actually think that basic calculus is a lot more useful than trigonometry.
Yeah, I agree.
There's a lot of areas in life where I find myself explaining a concept that makes use of just the knowledge of rates of change in various ways and summations over time. Like fundamentally the conceptual understanding of derivatives and integrals is something which really does hone thinking about many topics that if you don't understand it is just...
Well, exponential growth is a clear one, right? Where a lot of people don't understand that, you know, nothing happens for a long time and then a lot of things happen very, very quickly, and, you know, how those things stack upon one another. And I think wait, but why? He draws a diagram where he says it's basically like you're walking on a flat path and you hit a wall. That's kind of what an exponential is, you know, if you're following along. So, I agree with that. And then it's probably going to be a situation whereby specialists, for the sake of their own cognition, might go, it is worth me investing more time into memorizing these data points for the sake of my own profession. Because I can imagine in the case of, say, a writer might choose to deliberately go out of their way. Well, I think, let's take a more notable example. Eminem, I've heard, read the dictionary because he said, I need to know more words for my art form. This is applicable. Now, beyond that, obviously there's what to be said for consciously opting into something and a challenge that you want to voluntarily undertake to take up, say, mental real estate for yourself. I think it's important that, in the same way for physical fitness, I think it's important that someone finds a method of training or movement that works for them. It's not so much what you do, that you do something in the first place. And yes, I know you and I could probably go, well, you know, resistance training is probably king for longevity. But if it's the gap between sedentary and the most optimal routine, somewhere in there, anything that's going to take you closer to optimal, I'm all for, right?
It's a very 80-20 situation.
Agreed. Good old Parita. But I think maybe school will be about just finding someone the cognitive task that excites them and that they are willing to undertake and struggle through, even though a few prompts in an AI could totally remove that labor for you. You know what I mean?
Of course, the really concerning thing right now we're talking about a situation where humans do better than AI when you're talking about actual experts in their field will right now be outperforming the AI in their field. your average person in most fields right now is going to be outperformed by an AI in many different areas of knowledge work. And this is the dumbest the AI is ever going to be.
I totally agree. Man. Totally agree.
Like, we are actually on the track towards a situation that might resemble many sci-fi scenarios wherein knowledge work can maybe end up shifting from a requirement for human civilization to a nice luxury for people who want to occupy themselves and find some meaning, but is not in fact necessary for any human development because the AIs are doing it better than the humans. And that's a little bit of a scary thing to think
like
about.
raising chickens as a hobby, it's not like in the same farming can be a hobby for people.
Yeah. Like right now, the debunking work that I do, I can write software that will do it to basically the same degree that to like 90% of what I do based on current capabilities. And given the fact that there exists such a wider range of misinformation than accurate information, if I were to do that and have my software say with a 90% degree of certainty, this post is wrong for XYZ reasons, and that was fully AI generated, that I think still has a lot of utility. And that 90% number is encroaching upwards. So like the stuff that I do is also ripe for replacement, other than the fact that I got in early enough that people recognize my face and might enjoy the fact that it's a human telling it to them as opposed to an AI.
People trust you. I mean, I trust, but when you put out something, I don't double check it because I'm like, he's done his research. So
I had some friends. So like, I guess a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, I put out an April Fool's video.
Why would you do that?
And
what was it?
It was basically stop putting eggs with your avocados because they have a negative interaction with each other.
Wow.
And I showed a study that I cited, and throughout the video, I started making things more and more absurd. So like the study itself, if you would look at it carefully, it was like the authors were each like different language names for like April Fools, and like the DOI number was 31415926553, and like also the journal didn't exist. It was like a joke title, but it looked like a study if you don't actually read it carefully. And then as I started describing the effect more, when you eat the eggs and the avocados together, there's this weird interaction that happens that causes a chemical to go to your skin that over time you just start slowly turning more and more green.
A new state of matter was actually discovered through this.
I like showed basically a little a video of me turning into the Hulk. And like by the end, it should be extremely apparent that this was not a real thing. But like I have a friend of mine who's a doctor who's like, dude, I trust everything that you put out. So I sent this video to like 5 friends before even watching the whole thing.
That's it.
Like after only
you're
watching
educating
the
them.
first 30
That's
seconds
education, right? You're saying, look,
that's the thing.
You did your job.
I always say, don't trust me, trust my sources. And definitely don't share anything without watching the full video.
But it's just also just time. I mean, I forgive people, right? Because as you said yourself, I mean, you literally make a job of this, which is, you said it took you several days sometimes to look up where a source has potentially come from. I think it's something I wrote about like a month ago, but it's just, I think the world has become so complex and the means of verification so difficult that one person cannot establish a worldview without outsourcing trust. If I read an article which says, hey, this new, domestic policy in Indonesia is going to affect the price of this and going forwards in 6 months, and here's what you can do. For me to fully unpack those claims and analyze them, I need to understand the situation in Indonesia, how the policies work there, the prior policies. I need to understand geopolitics. I need to maybe understand the legal situation in whatever country it's relating to. I need to perhaps understand the seasonal climate and the effects on whatever produce is going to be involved in that. And the amount of domains of expertise I would need to know and have at my fingertips to even begin rigorously unpacking that claim, I would struggle to obtain in a lifetime. And yet, I'm going to read that and go, oh yeah, maybe I should... I'm not going to do that. So
this is why I will almost never make any public statement about politics, because I just hate politics in general, not political theory, but the current events side of things. I always have.
I'm not a fan of the current events going on either. I'm very happy to say.
Forget even what is going, like even when things are good, I just like, I wake up in the morning and I read like scientific and medical journals. I do not read the news. I only get things that are coming to me via like, if they make it past so many barriers that it's like such a big thing. And even then, half the time, like literally my friends will make fun of me for like not knowing who the vice president is in certain like eras. It's not good.
Well, does that come
But
from
I
disenchantment,
understand-
or because it would strike me that at the very least, obviously, politics is a field whereby you're asserting values, and there might be competing values, or people want to express those values differently. Tensions between freedom and security, what have you. But for someone so passionate about optimizing and seeing data, and there is, I'm sure, data-driven approaches to one can look at the impact of certain policies and economics. Why do you decide to sort of cultivate ignorance in that?
There's a handful of different reasons. One of the biggest ones, well, aside from my upbringing, where I grew up at a house where we would discuss Scientific American.
Oh, you might
dinner
have
table as
preferences, of
opposed
course,
to,
and there's
like,
only so many hours
politics.
in the day. Yeah, for sure.
So, I much prefer spending my time learning about new and
That I
exciting
agree
science
with.
than about
That-
what's going on.
same,
But
yeah.
that being said, there's also a strong level of disillusionment with the political system in the sense that I think a lot of the day-to-day back and forths within politics, for most people who follow them and get very heated about it, there's a disconnect between the human and the political system in a sense that even voting has like no statistical impact on most of what they're discussing. Like, sure, I'm not saying you shouldn't vote, because at scale, people do need to vote to make things happen. But it is very hard for me as someone who understands probability and statistics very well to say I should be devoting a large section of my mental headspace on something where the only value will come by me being able to argue with friends about it and then place a vote which has no ability to make an impact.
Yeah, in the sense of even if you say elect, or your vote contributes to the election of a representative that you ostensibly agree with their policy decisions, that is more of a suggestion of what you want to happen anyway. They are under no necessary legal obligation to follow through with that. And is that part of it? So you're sort of saying, look, I could expend all this effort for, what is nebulous at best impact?
It's more that if you look at the marginal utility of my vote, its impact on the actual outcome of life, the odds of my vote doing anything are basically non-existent. It's like the odds of me winning the lottery in terms of my vote actually making a meaningful difference. You can make some cases for local politics being a little bit more effective, but especially at the high level, the things that everyone always argues about, most people live in districts where it's pretty much a foregone conclusion who is going to win based on a bipartisan system, which is terrible, because in what world should all values be either in one camp or another?
Look,
you
and I, I'm sure everything we could say about US politics, from my understanding, look, you live in New York, so you know more than me, but everything I've read is, corrupt, inefficient, bloated, there's so many aspects of it. I can see why someone would say, I don't even want to touch this. Yeah. So...
like, oh, I get to vote between two people for president that were selected by how exactly? By what? Like,
the sort of illusion of choice in a way, really. Yeah.
Yeah. And there is only so much time in the day. If I were to actually be making any statements about this field, I would want to be extremely well informed about it. And that would require a tremendous amount of knowledge. And theoretically, with the platform that I have, I could be making some type of like larger scale difference about it, but that is not what I want to be focusing my time on. I would rather be focused on other things. And as a individual outside of my platform, as like a influencer, public figure, whatever, if you were to take the amount of time it would take for me to actually be very knowledgeable about the topics that I would be discussing and putting my vote towards, it feels like an outsized cost as compared to the benefit.
Yeah, I mean, look, I hope none of what I was saying was coming across as criticism. I think, even from...
No, it's
from,
fine.
The value of combating scientific misinformation is huge. I mean, even from where you started with COVID, incredibly valuable. Getting people to get vaccinated was incredibly important. Or, I think even combating quantum woo, which my friend, like I said, mentioned Dr. Blitz does, is important because that's a pipeline. If you start distrusting or having the wrong idea of what mainstream science says, and you start looking for like alternative medicine, and that can have serious health complications. And I got a message from a doctor the other day whereby he had made this video about the misinformation, a trend that was going around on TikTok, whereby people were claiming that fasting kills cancer. And he had found a couple of creators who had done a 40-day water fast and had then made videos whereby both of them, they thought their cancer would, what's not the medical word for abate. Anyway, Thank
go
you,
into remission.
And the surprise, it hadn't. And basically, it's going to this misinformation trend cost those people those lives. So no, I think that there's an enormous amount of good and important work that comes from combating misinformation. And I also think guilt tripping people into talking about certain things on their platform is not necessarily a constructive path forwards. Compelled speech is really what we need more of in the world.
I definitely was not taking that from anything you said. Just
good.
In case you were worried. No, you said absolutely nothing.
Just because this is something I think about as well, which is I am probably not even properly aware of how ignorant I am about UK history, UK politics. There are people who are interested in UK politics who can name to you right now pretty much every single MP, what their voting record was on certain different things that passed through the House of Commons. They know the history of the Conservative and Labour parties, the Liberal Democrats. They're so in it. And sometimes I feel like for me to come in and say, I think this policy is a bad idea, or this law shouldn't pass, it's like wandering into, it's like trying to submit a paper into a field having not read any of the prior things that were there, right? There potentially is justifiable context which I'm not privy to, which is leading this proposition to be shaped the way it is. That being said, I think I try and distinguish between that and say moral calculations, because on the how we implement certain things, that again from a science background, I would love data, hypothesis, good reasons to assert why we should go about this methodology rather than another, and those I'm mostly ignorant of unless I spend a lot of time diving into politics and economics and sociology and what have you. But on the moral component, that I feel that's more of a ground whereby everyone perhaps has similar stakes. I think there is a worrying trend whereby people will read, they'll read extensive academic theories on social theory or moral progress and use that sort of dunk on other people rather than sort of encourage them to see things in a wider pattern, and so use it to sort of one up and gain status, as opposed to say, oh hey, have you tried looking at things this way? That is a field where I feel a little bit more comfortable because everyone's got opinions on what's right and wrong. But aside from that, all the sentiments you expressed, I wrestle with because on the one hand I see something, I think there's no way this could be a good idea, and then in the back of my head I go, but I don't know enough to debunk it as much as I want, but I feel compelled to say something. So
I will sometimes say things on a higher level, like certain aspects of economic theory, political theory, those are things that do interest me. And these days, the only times I really do get sucked into more political type discussions is the whole thing going on with the HHS in the US right now with Robert F. Kennedy.
Oh, they're saying vaccines cause autism and all that sort of stuff. So,
yeah. So that's a space, I never thought that what I did would really overlap as much with current politics as it unfortunately is now.
Here we are.
Yeah. It's oh, you're saying the guy who I spent weeks doing lots of debunking on is now in charge of what?
Yeah. But that's a perfect example where a field of expertise has now become extremely politically relevant. So he's I'm going to talk about it, right? And similarly, if there were discussions around, redesigning, education curriculum around emerging technologies, you and I would probably pipe up and say, hey, drop the trig. Can we please prioritize the stats? So I think that's those are natural overlaps.
The thing is, even with the current situation in the US, I know that I could be getting a lot of increased follower counts if I were covering it very heavily and really giving my opinions and the data and doing debunking all the different things that they're saying. And I've made a couple small videos, but I actually have made a conscious decision to not be very involved with it, because when it comes to this type of political situation, it is very polarizing when it comes to people's identity politics. And there's a lot of research that indicates that when it comes to identity beliefs, we process that with different portions of our brain than with beliefs that are less close to home. It's more a limbic system response. If you are attacking this belief, you are attacking who I am as a person, and I will respond via a very instinctive, emotional fight or flight reaction as opposed to any sort of rational discourse. And a lot of what I do in the health space is a little bit different from your classic Western medicine, do not trust any supplement or person who's selling supplements, do not trust any new device without an umbrella review of evidence behind it. I'm a lot more about let's take everything within the avant-garde, up-and-coming, cutting-edge health and wellness space and actually try to view it through the lens of, can this potentially work what is the trade-off in terms of how likely is it to work versus the cost versus how it could potentially impact me? Like, there's a lot that I will potentially try for myself that I wouldn't necessarily even recommend to my audience, because maybe it's not worth it from a, like, it might work, it might not, but there's very little harm in trying it, but it's probably not cost effective. There's a lot of areas in which what I do is actually more towards the bleeding edge of the emerging health space. And it is an unfortunate fact that a lot of the most health-focused people in the US are also have lumped themselves in with a set of identities, beliefs, values that are anti-vaccination, anti-big institution, anti-big pharma, anti-like... It's very much people who have been failed by the medical establishment, decided they need to take their health in their own hands. They don't have very good resources about it, but the story resonates with something that this like chiropractor influencer is saying, and therefore they start believing the things that they're hearing from that, and they start to follow it. But those are the people who I want to talk to. Those are the people who I want to actually say, look, I agree that this medical system has many, many problems. I agree that many of the things that you are saying that are problematic are correct, and that you should be focused on your diet, your health, your fitness, not just on taking a pill to solve whatever like symptoms that you're experiencing. All of this is very important. And what I want to talk to you about is how can we use genuine evidence to support these cutting edge things that you want to try, as opposed to things that are preying on your mistrust of the institutions to sell you overpriced pills that will do nothing for you. And I want to be able to talk to those people in a way that is not influenced by the fact that I said something about a political figure who they like because of the overall message, regardless of the truth or falsehood of some of the individual statements that they've made.
No, I mean, I'm extremely sympathetic to that. I've been a bunch of things I want to follow up on that on, which is, you've got to understand why people like Robert F. Kennedy or even Donald Trump appealed to a lot of Americans, which is, a sort of a fuck you to the existing establishment, saying the existing establishment has failed us, and to patronize every single one of them and say, hey, you're wrong for thinking this, is not a way to persuade, right? But at the same time, you've also got to say what Robert F. Kennedy says is wrong. like vaccines don't cause autism, and that's a tension. That's a hard one, right? And it sounds like to me you're approaching with the most constructive, with a sort of benevolent, pragmatic approach, where you're saying, look, if I just outright sort of baseball bat all of these things, they're just going to turn away. But if I can coax them in with the positives and saying the things we agree on, which is the failures that you've experienced through the system, but I want to help you, hey, maybe you'll listen to me,
Pretty much, yeah.
That's why when I do my videos with two characters, I think it's super important to articulate the opposing side or a side that disagrees with your own, because I think that's a way to get people to listen to you. Because otherwise, people. Oh, sorry.
No, I entirely agree with that, and I've been for a while contemplating doing a lot more of that style of video, where two characters arguing to steel man before debating, because I do think that it is a very good way both to capture attention and hold attention, but also it is very difficult when discussing topics with a lot of nuance to give that nuance in a manner that can keep people engaged and make sure that you're not misrepresenting one side, because there's a lot of depth here.
I think the difficulty is, again, there's so many different ways we can go into this, which is that I think there's also a thing whereby I sometimes feel myself resistant to even articulate an opposing side, because I can hear other voices and other creators, or I've seen criticism of them, of people who do that, where they say, oh, you're giving ground, you shouldn't be doing that, you shouldn't be endorsing that view in any way. But at the same time I say, listen, like, are these people I see a lot of these people are victims of misinformation. They're victims of misinformation.
Yeah.
And if I had been exposed to the things they've been exposed to, and I hadn't had the educational background I had that, I would hold their views, right? And so, for me to lambast them and patronize them is only going to cement them further into something which I think is harmful and erroneous. What good am I doing other than that? That is virtue signaling, right? That is righteous fury, which is going nowhere. So,
I think anyone who makes that claim that you providing the arguments for the other side is a detriment because it is giving credence to their views, I think they fundamentally misunderstand how constructive communication happens, especially when battling misinformation. there's a lot of research into this topic, into this space, how to have difficult conversations, how to sway people. And the only way to do that is to first establish common ground, to first show them that you truly understand their side, and then say, this is to the degree which I agree with you. But now let's talk about why I don't come as far in that direction for XYZ reason. And these are the reasons which I pulled back. And only once they realize that you understand them can they let down those walls of identity, beliefs, and defense mechanism and say, look, let's allow rationality to enter the room.
Exactly. Or even just asking questions. Like the way I sometimes approach it is I'll say, look, you might have a good answer for this. This is why I don't agree with your view. Like after we've established common ground, right? But like, how do you reconcile this? You know, if vaccines really caused autism, why don't you have way more trains in America? That just makes no sense to me. It's a dumb joke. Really, it is. It's one of them I enjoyed recently. But, you know, but seriously, and saying, you know, why wouldn't you see this explosion of all this? And maybe they have a good answer and maybe they don't. Another group I'm sympathetic towards, I'm sure you've seen it, are the flat earthers, whereby they'll in some ways they'll be so scientific because no one, let's face it, the vast majority of people don't consider the evidence as to why the earth is round. They'll just accept it because it was in the education system. And these are people who, probably for a variety of emotional reasons and a bunch of others, question it. And sometimes their questions are really interesting questions, and there are good answers. But I've got to be sympathetic in the sense of, hey, you're asking questions. I can't remember who it was, but there was a flat Earth creator. He bought himself a trip to the Antarctic or the Arctic, and he made a video saying, "I was wrong." And he's like indisputable, I was wrong. But unfortunately, all the comments said he's been bought out. He's been bought out. They've got it. But of course, but you know,
no, that's. There's a lot of like big flat Earth creators who end up switching at some point because you know the greater visibility you get, the more access to real information.
Yeah. So
it's only so long.
It's a hard one. I mean,
I saw a thing recently. Like apparently, there's a big conspiracy theory in China that like most of Western history is actually a lie. Like there's no way that the Greek statues would have been able to be that detailed made back then, and these are all just replicas. And like just
that's cool. I kind of like that. We invented a whole mythos and background. The Greeks could have never been that detail oriented. Oh my god.
It's like you see all the stuff about the pyramids. Like,
I mean, there's a new pyramid conspiracy every day. Whatever.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, the pyramids are fascinating, and it is bizarre the things they were able to do back then with their level of technology that we don't fully understand. Does that mean aliens? No, it does not mean aliens, because the answer is never aliens.
Yeah, aliens is not the god of the gaps, it's the alien of the gaps. Well, we don't understand it, therefore the only reasonable explanation. So extraterrestrials. So, yeah. Do you think, I mean, this is a heavy question, but do you think ultimately, I feel like the misinformation is net winning. And the state of global politics, and to a certain extent, is accelerating that. And I worry about what's happening in the education system, whereby there's going to be this cognitive offloading. I worry that we're heading to a place whereby, the truth's not going to win out, or even if you don't believe in the capital T truth, reasonable scientific discourse, measured claims whereby you say, listen, it's not that this is the best bicep exercise ever. It's that across our meta-analyses, 70% of the time, this seems to be slightly more effective than this. I feel like that's on the losing side, and I worry. Do you feel that way?
I very much worry, and I agree that it does feel like we're losing because we're fighting fundamental aspects of human psychology and technology, which is, first, sensational views get more traction. Second, our fundamental understanding of statistics is such that it does not matter what the totality of evidence says. The anecdotes will end up mattering more than the peer-reviewed
research. Run on stories.
Similarly, we are getting into a period where there is so much information. Like it used to be that the power was essentially in a slightly different location. Like the amount of information that could come out based on the couple of news networks, the couple of newspapers, was such that everyone was reading sort of the same things, and there was a high standard around those to ensure accuracy, and there would even be the ability to debate the accuracy around it in a way that everyone would hear and
exactly.
understand.
I wrote about this. You could, in theory, know everything there was to know in a day. In theory, you could approach it.
But the barrier to putting out information was high enough that it was a skewed dynamic. But now, especially with AI, you can create infinite pieces of content around whatever type of misinformation you want. And what will end up spreading the most is whatever is going to be the most sensationalized and out there or emotional and resonate the most with the base levels of human psychology that in no way take into account an understanding of science, statistics, rationality, anything like that. And in that world, the only way that proper information, science, everything can win out is if there are structural, institutional, platform level constraints that are well designed enough to determine truth from falsehood. And this is something that is fundamentally counter to the monetary incentives of these platforms. Therefore, we have a tragedy of the commons situation where the only way to really do it is to implement it at a higher government level or through coalitions of tech that are fundamentally fueled by well-meaning billionaires that odds of that happening are not necessarily super high.
Yeah. Yes.
Like I have, no, first.
I was simply going to say, I wonder if so much of this is going to collapse in on itself because, even the main economic model of the internet, or one of the primary ones, which is advertising, as ChatGPT, I think as of today, recording, it's the 5th most visited website in the world. If that reaches number 1, you don't have to go to a website to get its information, which means you have to see its ads, which means that, so many paid ads are going to, that economy is going to collapse. So, are you going to start hosting information for free if that's just going to, get trawled from it, or are you going to have to pay for access? And then I worry about things like sponsored prompt answers and things like that, if that's the main way people interface with it. But all this to say, I even think, so far as government interventions, there's so many different policy things we could do around asserting what's true, demanding references, all of that sort of stuff. I even think things like tailored algorithms that show you something unique to you, depending on who you are as a person, I almost think that shouldn't exist, which is a wild take.
Oh, yeah, because talk about creating walled gardens.
If you wanted the system to maximally confuse the populace, that's what you would do. You would show everyone different stuff and in different order. And I feel like it goes beyond the situation, because you can imagine someone makes a piece of content, say like a right-wing pundit criticizing immigration in their country, right? Which you're allowed to do, freedom of speech, you're allowed to have issues with immigration policy in your country. But the algorithm recognizes that someone who finishes that video, maybe it follows up with another piece of content, which is a true news story from a news source, a reputation news source, of an immigrant committing a crime. If you stack those two videos next to each other, that tells a story. That is prime to try and influence you. Now, neither one of those videos on their own were trying to manipulate you. One's expressing a legitimate opinion, one's just a news story, that a thing that happened. But if you stick those next to each other, suddenly it's persuasion, right? And the fact that
I mean, think about like the number of airline crashes in the last year were actually lower than if you look at the trends in airline crashes across time, they're going down. And yet many people were afraid to fly after many news headlines about airline issues, plane crashes.
Yeah. So I would, if I were Supreme Commander of Earth, I would try out getting rid of tailored algorithms, because, and then, the pushback I've had on friends on this is like, well, there were still issues when there were only 5 channels, there's still misinformation. And I go, but at least you could meaningfully enter someone else's information space. Because the fact of the matter is, everyone I meet has consumed not only different content, but in a different order. And God, any editor will tell you the way you cut videos together really makes an impact on what they mean,
Oh, yeah. I think there's 2 primary solutions here. One is the general trend of the internet is going to be moving away from a ad-based business model and towards a subscription-based model, both because putting a paywall behind content prevents it from being scraped for new AI, and because in a world of infinite information, you only want the information sources that you trust, and in an infinite feed of information. You cannot rely on advertising. So like basically it's you support the people who you actually trust to give you the information that you want. And that's a little bit challenging to get new information outside of who you already subscribe to. But essentially, you'll have to be carefully choosing based on the recommendations of people you trust, like this sort of trust network. It's like I just started a Substack like a week or two ago.
Oh, sick. We'll plug it. We'll plug it.
Posting on it.
I've had one recently too. I'll add you to my page. If you want, you got to do your due diligence on me. We can do due diligence on each other. All right, we got to be careful with this network.
I think I've seen enough of your stuff that we can call it. But yeah, because I figured at this point, that sort of subscribe to your creators and pay some amount, and you sort of have to in order to be, or even there is a free version of Substack also. At least it means that you can get my content without being forced to only watch the most viral pieces based on the algorithm. And there's a large move in that direction. But I think, so for a long time now, or at least the last couple of years, I have been sort of on the verge of trying to launch a new type of social network, because there's something that I think needs to exist. And that would be something along the lines of, call it TruthNet, where you have a social network where anytime a person creates a post, and that post contains any type of factual statement, which is easy to determine via AI technology, if a factual statement is being made, then there needs to be a truth rating on that post. And I would model it after sort of an ethos, pathos, logos set of pillars based on like the old Aristotle sort of pillars of persuasive argument. Do you base your argument on logic, on emotion, or on identity, like an argument from authority? And for a given person, like if I am a doctor who is a cardiologist, then if I make a post about something to do with cardiology, then my argument from authority pillar there is going to be fairly high. But if I am a chiropractor and I make the post about cardiology, then that will be low. However, if I cite a source for that, then that will increase the logical or data-backed argument side of things. Or if I tell you an anecdote about my sister, then that will be more towards the emotional side with a very small nod towards the
you're related to this person, you probably have access to the truth.
Yeah. And it would have to be a more sophisticated algorithm, almost like the Google PageRank, where what you would have is each person would slowly build up an authority within their account based on both published credentials that they have authenticated, as well as their total posting and commenting history, where if a given person will continuously comment in a given field and provide evidence within that field, then their trustworthiness within that field would go up. On a given person's post, there would be the ability to comment both on the main post and to debate any of these pillars in terms of going back and forth about how applicable is this piece of evidence for this statement that they made. And if I am an expert in that field and I say it's not applicable, then its impact on lowering the evidence linkage to that post is higher as opposed to a random person who says that. Similarly with the arguments with everything, essentially what you're doing is then building out a level of trustworthiness for a given post. And the trustworthiness of something will both be very apparent when anyone sees it and will impact its distribution.
I was going to say, it will correlate with
how
they get shared. Yeah.
So you could still have some level of discovery. And if you're a person who I only want to see the emotional stuff,
give me.
I don't have the ability to that's fine, but it should be entirely present. Whenever anyone is posting, they should get a prompt where did this come from? Do you have evidence for this? No. Be aware that this will impact you shouldn't have to force people to look for the evidence. And if you say study says X in general on all the current platforms, most people just assume that you know what you're talking about. But if on this platform, someone says study says X and anyone initially is I checked and there is no study, then unless you can respond with a study, it immediately gets tanked from a trustworthy perspective and flagged.
And it also means that sort of, let's say, emotive rhetoric, whereby you say, this is bad, or this person is the worst, or whatever, wouldn't do very well. It would be more like empirical statements and claims would do better, generally.
Well, you could still have the emotional side of things. Like, not every post needs to be something that is backed by evidence. You can have an argument, you can have an emotional appeal, and those can still have plenty of distribution. But your emotional appeal should be labeled as an emotional appeal, not labeled as an argument from evidence. So people should be able to contextualize it in that.
If you had like a heart rate monitor, he said, "I am seething about this news source," and it's like your heart rate spiked, and you're like the timestamp of you watching this. And you're like, "Well, he is seething," you know.
He is seething. He is seething.
Yeah.
Fun as that would be, not really necessary for this, because the point
No,
is,
I know.
If someone is, I know. No, it's that would be actually hilarious. Like, talk about like crazy dystopian Big Brother situations.
Well, you want to give me the evidence that you're actually outraged?
Heart rate
Yeah. So
we're not mandating everyone wear heart rate monitors so we can tell their emotional impacts to all.
With this heart rate monitor, you can shit post all day long on TruthNet. You know, the fidelity range. Oh man. Oh god.
A little underground market for EpiPens to jack up the.
Do you want to be? You can be outraged about anything you read now by injecting just around.
That's right. Just press our little adrenaline button.
So that would, I don't know, but at the same time, it'd be kind of interesting if it meant you'd have to, like, I feel the effort it would take to evidence your outrage by the time you end it. It might mean that you don't want to post about it anymore. You know, I sometimes wonder what would society look like.
This is take 5 of me trying to be.
If tweets had like a mandatory like 10-minute wait period before they had to go out.
Oh yeah.
Would society be better? I don't know, man. We're just sort of like, do I really want to post this? So
yeah,
that's
valid.
Well, that'd be cool. Look, if you decide to make that project happen, I'd be super interested. That'd be, because it's just getting really difficult. More and more of just thinking that, unless I know the source or have time to actually really look something up, I can't really trust what I see. And
to sort of bring it back around, that would also be incorporating some of these AI detection technologies and chain of custody technologies for determining whether something was human generated or AI generated. Yeah.
Well, because something that could be really powerful is, something like an accident happens, or there's something you're at a concert, or you see something take place and you take a video of it. That's timestamped. You upload the file. Then at the very least, you can say, "Oh well, I saw this happen. Like this light hit a camera that I possess, and that's something." And then you can go from there, as opposed to this was conjured out of a bunch of servers. So
exactly. And as I sort of mentioned in my previous video, there is technology that is going to be slowly making its way to the main camera manufacturers, where if you take a picture with an iPhone or a Sony camera, then it will embed a little piece of cryptography in it, that when that gets passed to the editing software, there is sort of a blockchain level of transference of a handshake. So that it went from one to the other, that then it gets edited in certain ways, and then it gets passed to the news organization. And just like you can ensure cryptographic transactions on a blockchain, so too the news organization will be able to verify via math and cryptography that the file that they are receiving is the file that came out of the camera based on this sort of embedded piece of information. And if it does not have that, then you have to assume it was AI generated, and that is the world we're going to be moving towards. Assume fake until proven true.
Assume fake until proven true. Lord almighty. Well, anyway, I appreciate I've taken up so much of your time. I really thank you so much for chatting to me about all these different topics today. I found it super interesting, and I think it's incumbent upon people like us and everyone really, but to try and make technologies and solutions like this work in a system which is incentivized to whatever maximizes profit and attention retention. And I've enjoyed your work for some time, so I've also just generally jazzed to be speaking to you. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on. It's been a blast.
For people who want to learn more about you, where should they find you? Obviously, your Substack now, which you're launching, and you seem to do a million things. I don't know how you do it all, but where would you direct people if you wanted to direct people anyway?
It's at Distilled Science on all the platforms: Substack, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. The only ones I'm not really on much are, technically I have a Twitter, but very rarely post. Partially because my username is 16 characters long normally, and I had to remove a letter in order to get on Twitter. There is no E in Distilled.
That's so you had to distill it.
Exactly.
Devastating. Cool.
So I'll blame that for my lack of Twitter
presence. I think that's all the ones to not be spending a lot of time on nowadays is probably a good one to neglect.